And so if you've been with us for the last several weeks, you know that we've been in a series called Thriving in Babylon. And we're talking about what it means to thrive in a culture of compromise. As the moral fabric of culture starts to pull apart, as it starts to decay, how do we stand strong? How do we stand firm? And we've been doing that by looking at the life of Daniel. Daniel was placed in this kingdom of Babylon to serve King Nebuchadnezzar. And he was placed in this extremely carnal and godless society. And we've been looking at his life, and we've been pulling out the principles of how it was that Daniel was able to thrive in this culture. And if there's one thing that we've seen throughout the story of Daniel, it's that Daniel knew how to stand his ground. Daniel knew how to stand up for what he believed in. In fact, when we first encounter his story in Daniel chapter 1, he's being asked to eat the king's food. And this may not seem like that big of a deal, but culturally at that time for Daniel, what that meant for him was that he would be seen as unclean before his God. And so he chose to say, no, I will not. I will stand firm. I will not eat the food that the king offers. And all throughout the story of his life, he stands firm in the things that he believes. He's serving in a culture that its name is literally rooted in the word Babel, which means confusion, a culture of confusion. And do you ever feel like when you look at our culture today, you could describe it the same way? Like that the problems that we have in our culture really are rooted in confusion. There's confusion surrounding race and gender, people's identity and their purpose all around. The media is confused. Politicians are confused. Our entertainment industry is confused. Even the world of sports is confusing. I watch sports these days. I watch football. I don't know what a catch is, and I don't think the referees do either. Everything about our society is shrouded in confusion. Nothing is definitive. And it's a culture of confusion that is ever changing. And it's in the midst of a culture like that the world needs people who know how to stand their ground. That the world needs people who know who they are, that can stand firm in the things of God. But see, the problem is that often the people who take this idea of standing firm to heart are the exact opposite people that need to take it to heart. They're dogmatic, unchanging, rigid. These people are always standing their ground. Wherever their ground is, wherever they're standing, that's it. That's their ground. They're standing on it. They have no issue with this. But have you noticed that culture is making us afraid to disagree? We're afraid to disagree with people. We're afraid to speak up for things that we know people won't agree with. Many of you sitting in this room might be dreading this Thursday for that very reason. You know that you're going to gather around a table with a bunch of people that you love and you care about. You're going to have a beautiful meal. It's going to be all roses and sunshine. And then someone's going to bring up politics. Someone's going to mention Donald Trump. Someone's going to mention Hillary Clinton. And you know it's going to go south. You know it's not going to go well. So you're dreading it. Or maybe for you, maybe your family will make it through the meal. Maybe you'll make it all the way through the meal, and then you'll sit down and you'll relax, and before you slip into that food coma, you'll turn on the TV and you'll watch some football, but the story won't be about football. It'll be about who that day knelt, who didn't kneel, what it meant, who was suspended, who wasn't suspended, and suddenly you're thrown into these conversations that you just honestly don't want to have because they draw lines between you and the people that you love. And where there was unity, where there was love, all of a sudden there is division and defensiveness. So our default is just to stay silent. Our default is to say nothing. And culture has made us to believe that it's better if we just surround ourselves with people who think and feel and believe exactly like we do. Because if we do that, then we can feel like we're really standing up for things. We can feel like we're really standing our ground because we can speak up on things, and every time we do, we will be affirmed and encouraged because everyone believes just like we do. The problem is if we surround ourselves with people who already believe exactly like we believe, we may be missing out on the moments that God is calling us to step into so that we can stand our ground in the midst of opposition. See, it's easy to stand your ground when there is no opposition. It's easy to stand your ground when everybody already agrees with you. It's easy to stand your ground when you're surrounded by people who don't disagree with your way of life, who don't disagree with your way of thinking. So we need to be doing life with people who don't think like us. And we need to be able to do life with them without thinking that they are dumb or just wrong. Because, of course, if they were smart, they would think just like you and they would just be right as well, right? And those are the lines that we end up often drawing. But have you ever felt that? Have you ever felt like you can't speak up on an issue because you're just kind of out of sync or out of rhythm with how everybody else feels about it? I feel this way a lot about entertainment. I feel this way about TV and movies. Like, has there ever just been an incredible buzz around a TV show or a movie and then you check it out and you're just like, I don't know. I'm not sure. How many of you, show of hands, I'm going to give you a moment to really just believe in something. How many of you watch this show, This Is Us? All across the room, This Is Us. You love it. You watch it. You cry, right? Every time This Is Us is on, I see posts on my Facebook like, why do I do this to myself? Every time I watch this show, I cry my face off. And I'm going to just stand my ground here for a moment. I'm going to tell you, I don't get it. I don't get it. I know. Okay. Thank you, Eli. I don't get it. I maybe have made a lot of enemies here today, but I don't get it. I watched a few minutes of it one time, and there was one of those parts that I know that you're talking about when you say you cry, and I laughed. And I don't know if that means that I don't have a heart. The problem may be me. I'm not saying that it's not, but I just don't get it. And so I dread conversations about that show because everybody's like, oh, did you see This Is Us? And I'm just thinking like, no, I didn't. But when you see something that you love and that you're super excited about, it's the exact opposite sentiment. I really enjoy Stranger Things. See, this is what I'm talking about. That's how it feels when you surround yourself with people. No problem speaking up because you know you're just going to get cheered. But when I finished Stranger Things, I had been on a trip actually to Honduras when it came out, so I was a little late in seeing it than a lot of my friends. But when I finished it, I was so excited to come to the office the next day to talk about it, to talk about all the different twists and changes and what happens, where could it go from here? Because when we agree on something, it's really fun to enter into that conversation. But when we don't, it's much more difficult. It's much more difficult. We inevitably find ourselves trying to avoid those conversations. And so we pick this story up with Daniel, who's placed in a kingdom where no one else is like him. No one else thinks like him. In fact, the king lumps Daniel in with all the other sorcerers, all the other magicians. Daniel is a prophet, but the king doesn't recognize that gift on his life. He just sees it as the same as what these other guys are doing. So he lumps him in with them. And a little bit of context on Daniel's life, in case you're not aware of his backstory. When he was 15 years old, an army swept through his town, killed his parents, took him as a prisoner, castrated him, made him a eunuch, and then forced him to serve with the king. Trained him to how to serve false gods. It was a culture that was entirely against everything that he had ever stood for. They killed his parents. They took away his past. They castrated him and made him a eunuch, taking away his future. Daniel was an orphan who would never have children, and you thought your boss was bad. And this is the context that Daniel is serving in. This is the context that he's serving in. And when we pick up the story in Daniel chapter 4, I'm just going to read this to you. It won't be on the screen. But King Nebuchadnezzar has relied on Daniel a couple of times to interpret dreams. There's been these moments where he's had dreams and no one else has been able to interpret them, but Daniel has. So he's gained a little bit of a reputation for his ability to do this. And this is a letter that the king is writing, so it's in the first person. And he says, I said, Daniel, chief of magicians, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too difficult for you. Here is my dream. Interpret it for me. These are the visions I saw while lying in my bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful. its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it the beasts of the field found shelter, and the birds of the air lived in its branches. From it every creature was fed. In the vision I saw while lying in my bed, I looked, and there before me was a messenger, a holy one, coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, "Cut down the tree and trim off its branches. Strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it, and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground, in the grass of the field. Let him be drenched with dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let it be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass by him." Now the Bible then tells us that Daniel's countenance changed. Daniel's face changed, and he was very distraught. And the king could kind of read this on his face, and so he essentially said, "Listen, don't let this dream and its trouble alarm you. Just tell me what it means." And Daniel replies, "My Lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries. The tree you saw, which grew large and strong with its top touching the sky, with beautiful leaves and abundant fruit, providing food for all. You, O king, are that tree." See, in this moment, what Daniel is essentially telling the king is that tree that you saw that was bearing fruit and covering everyone and feeding everyone, that's you. You've grown to such prominence and importance. That's you. But you're going to be cut down. You're going to be judged for the life that you've lived. You're going to be judged for your arrogance and your pride. You're going to be cut down. You're going to lose your mind, and you're going to live among the animals. And Daniel's response in this moment is, "Oh, that this was about your enemies." Have you ever been in a moment in your life where someone could have said, "I told you so" to you, but they chose not to? Like they chose instead just to love you, just to care for you in that moment? 2 years ago, after Christmas, I was taking the Christmas lights off of my house, and I don't have a good ladder. It's only like 7 feet tall, and it's an A-frame ladder, so we always borrow a ladder from my neighbor who's got this great extension ladder. And so we're about to take the lights off of the house, and my wife, Kristen, says, "You should go get the ladder from the neighbor." And I think to myself, no, I can get on our roof with this 7-foot A-frame ladder, no problem. I am an agile human man. So I lean the 7-foot ladder up against a tree that's next to my house, and the plan is I will climb to the top of the ladder, and then I will kind of like step over onto my roof, push off of the tree onto the roof, and then I'll get the lights down. And by the way, it worked. So I got up there, I took the lights down, it was great, I was feeling good. And then it was time to get down. And that proved a little more tricky. So I put one foot on the ladder, and I can't really see the ladder, so I'm kind of like half dangling off the side of my roof. And I put my foot on the ladder, and it's becoming more and more like a scene out of Christmas Vacation. And right when I put my weight on the ladder, it slips out from the side of the tree, and I fall from the roof, and I land on this brick like railing around our porch, like right on my chest. And Kristen says she'll never forget the sound it made, which is great, but I'll never forget how it felt. And it took all of the wind out of my lungs, and I was literally laying on the ground, and I thought, I'm dying. And this has nothing to do with the story, but I think you'll enjoy it. We were also getting our chimney inspected that day. And so I'm laying on the ground, writhing in pain, and this van pulls up. And out of it pops a chimney sweep in a tuxedo jacket and a top hat. And he comes like bounding up our driveway, doing his little routine. And I'm just like, maybe I'm dead. Maybe I'm hallucinating. And I'm laying there in this moment, and it's probably no surprise to you that Kristen did not think the 6-foot ladder up against the tree was a good idea. She did not think that was something I should do. But I remember laying on the ground, and I pulled my shirt up and revealed the evidence of what had just happened. And Kristen just looked at me and said, I think you should go to the doctor. What she could have said was, I told you so. This is not what you should have done. And this is the moment that Daniel finds himself in when he interprets this dream for the king. This is the king who killed his parents, who imprisoned him, castrated him, took everything from him. I don't know about you, but if I'm the one interpreting a dream that says that person is about to pay, I'm feeling really good about myself. I'm feeling really self-righteous. I'm feeling really ready to pounce. Like as I start to get that interpretation, as I start to realize what this dream means, a smile probably creeps across my face. And I probably look him in the face as he's humbled and he knows what's coming. I probably look him in the face and I say, I told you so. I told you if you lived this arrogant lifestyle, this is what was going to happen. I told you that this lifestyle was going to lead to destruction. I told you that this was going to happen. But instead, verse 27, this is what Daniel says. Therefore, your majesty, be pleased to accept my advice, renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue. In this moment where Daniel could have dropped the biggest I told you so in history, instead of pointing to his rightness, instead of pointing to the fact that he was right all along, he's been standing his ground and he was in the right, instead of pointing to that, he points to the way out. He cares more about the person, the human in front of him, than he does about being right in that moment. In that moment, to someone who has taken everything from him, his past, his future, his present, this person has taken everything from him. And somehow in that moment, Daniel finds it within himself to point to a way out. And see, I wonder how many times we are in the lives of people and we're placed in their lives by God to stand firm, yes, to stand our ground, yes, to model what a godly lifestyle looks like. And yet when that moment comes where they face the consequences of the lifestyle that they've lived, the decisions that they've made, how many times do we choose the I told you so? How many times do we choose to point to our rightness? How many times do we choose to, in those moments, see, I told you this life was going to catch up with you, and look, I was right. I was right. How many times do we point it back to ourselves and not care about the person who is right in front of us? How many times do we choose not to point to the way out? See, I believe that we have been placed in people's lives to be a consistent voice. And sometimes we get frustrated when there's not an immediate result. Sometimes we get frustrated when it feels like they're just not listening. That is the life that Daniel was living. He was asked to eat food that he couldn't eat, and he stood firm. He was asked to bow down to idols that he couldn't worship, and he stood firm. And all throughout this time, he's slowly but surely modeling for King Nebuchadnezzar what it looks like to stand firm in what you believe about God. But when he's presented with the moment where he could really push it in his face, instead, he invites him into what he knows. Instead of pointing to his rightness, he invites him into a life that says, you can get rid of your pride. You can get rid of your arrogance. You can move forward. Daniel is the voice telling this wicked king who has treated him horribly that it's still not too late. See, one of the biggest lies of the enemy is that it's just too late. This is the path you've chosen. This is the life you live. This is your life. Live with it because you chose it. This is all you will ever have. But Daniel in that moment says it's not too late. You can turn. You can turn from your wicked ways, and your prosperity may continue. Now here's the thing. The Bible tells us that in that moment, the king did not heed Daniel's advice. He did not heed his advice. And the judgment that was in that dream came true. The king literally lost his mind and lived in the fields among the animals. But that wasn't the end of his story. Verse 34 says this. At the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the people of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the people of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, what have you done? See, in that moment, King Nebuchadnezzar looked to God and he found his sanity. He found his sanity. The Bible says that his honor was restored. And I can only imagine where he would have looked or what he would have done if Daniel's response in the earlier moment had been an I told you so moment. See, Daniel remained a consistent voice all throughout the king's life that constantly pointed to a better way, that constantly said, there's a better way to do this. There's a better way to do this. But the important thing is this, and this is what we learned from Daniel. Do we stand our ground? Yes. But we also have to know how to love well. We have to be able to stand our ground and love well. That is the only way that what we do when we stand our ground will have any significance. Because if we stand our ground and we stand our ground and we stand our ground, and then the moment comes where we have an opportunity to speak into someone's life, and we choose the I told you so moment, we choose to point inward to ourselves, to our rightness, to what we have done, we move from just standing our ground to trampling on the ground that we had been standing on, to completely undercutting all that it stood for in the first place. But instead, we're presented with these moments, and we have to continue to stand firm and also love well. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 1 through 6 says this, 1 through 8 says this, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and talk knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and I give over my body to hardship that I may boast but do not have love, again, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. We can stop there. There are too many people in our society who are willing to be the clanging cymbals. They're willing to stand their ground. There are entire networks and careers that are devoted to people just clanging the loudest. But what the culture needs is people that are willing to stand firm in their convictions and in what they believe, but also love well. To couple what it is that God has put inside them with love, so that when they're presented with those moments, where they've been a consistent voice in somebody's life, that they can speak and their words can have weight and meaning. We have to stand firm, but we have to also love well. Would you bow your heads with me this morning? God, we thank you for what you've called us to. We thank you, God, that you've called us to stand firm in our principles. We thank you that you've called us, God, to a life that's set apart to be an example. But God, I pray that you would help us with coupling that with loving well. God, that you would couple that, God, with the love that we need to see the person in front of us and not just our own self-righteousness. God, I pray that all of us in this room, that we would be challenged to love in a greater way, God, that we would be challenged to move beyond just being clanging cymbals. And God, that we could be a voice that has weight and meaning in the lives of those that are around us.